US President Donald Trump mocked the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy as a poor negotiator and grossly incompetent. He said this as tensions continue to rise over the administration's direct talks with Russia about ending the war it launched nearly 3 years ago. But Donald Trump suggested that Ukraine was responsible for Russia's invasion of the country 3 years ago, arguing Kyiv could have made a deal to avoid the war. Trump did not mention that Russia has also failed to end the war it began when it invaded its neighbor. But the comments come amid criticism from European allies and many American intelligence experts that Ukraine and European nations invested in Ukraine's defense had been excluded from negotiations that began early on Tuesday between US and Russian officials in Saudi Arabia. Listen in to what the US president had to say. We have remarks from Zelenskyy lined up for you and the finer details as well.
And I think I have the power to end this war. And I think it's going very well. But today I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal. I could have made a deal for Ukraine that would have given them almost all of the land, everything, almost all of the land, and no people would have been killed, and no city would have been demolished, and not one dome would have been knocked down. But they chose not to do it that way. And President Biden, in all fairness, he doesn't have a clue. What he was so bad for this. He was so bad, so pathetic, so sad.
Я переконаний, для України, для нашого регіону і для Європи принципово, щоб будь-які перемовини щодо закінчення війни відбувались не за спиною у ключових суб'єктів, яких зачіпають наслідки російської агресії.
Less than a month after Donald Trump took office and just 6 days after his call with Russian President Putin, top US and Russian officials wrapped up over 4 hours of talks in Riyadh on the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. The talks came as Kyiv and his European allies were sidelined and as Moscow introduced a significant new demand. The high-level talks, which were attended by US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, aimed at strengthening ties and finding a resolution to the almost 3-year-long war. Rubio said that both parties agreed to restaff their respective embassies in Washington and Moscow and appoint high-level teams to continue negotiations. He also called the meeting the first step of a long and difficult journey, further adding that in order to bring an end to any conflict, there has to be concessions made by all sides.
For us to be able to continue to move down this road, we need to have diplomatic facilities that are operating and functioning normally. The second point is that we're going to appoint a high-level team from our end to help negotiate and work through the end of the conflict in Ukraine in a way that's enduring and acceptable to all the parties engaged.
Meanwhile, Lavrov called the talks very useful, adding that the two sides did not just listen, but heard each other.
Разговор был, я считаю, очень полезный. Мы не просто слушали, но и слышали друг друга. И у меня есть основания полагать, что американская сторона стала лучше понимать нашу позицию, которую мы на основе многократных выступлений президента Путина подробно на конкретных примерах изложили в очередной раз.
The talks came just as Russia announced a major new demand for NATO to scrap its 2008 promise to one day give Ukraine membership and for Kyiv to agree to neutrality. However, the Kremlin also said that Ukraine has a sovereign right to join the European Union, but that this sovereignty does not apply to military alliances. Conditions were discussed for a potential Trump-Putin meet, but no date has been set yet. Ukraine's absence from the negotiating table has sparked concerns in Kyiv and among European allies. Ukrainian President Zelenskyy has said that any outcomes from talks without Kyiv's involvement would be unacceptable. Samia Afsar, NDTV World.